Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast. I'm Dani, and today Great.com talks with Sue Abderholden, the Executive Director of NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness on Minnesota. Now, if you haven't heard of it yet, they work to improve the lives of children and adults with mental illness and their families. Before we begin, remember to press subscribe on YouTube or in your podcast app. Now, hello, Sue, and welcome to our podcast.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's our pleasure. I always say that I'm very much interested in talking about mental health issues. I feel like it's something that we haven't discussed enough on the world right now. So it's always a good opportunity to learn more about it. And in this case, learn more about the work that your organization is doing. And how did it begin? You've been working for a quite long time right now, right?
Yes, well, the organization itself started back in around 1976, and it was actually a group of moms mainly. So we always called them the NAMI mommies, and they were actually protesting the closure of Hastings State Hospital. And what they said is, you take the money that you're saving and build community services. And they were actually going to take the money and put it to the other state institutions because of two major lawsuits. And so these mainly women went to the Capitol and they won. They got a new program started that was called Sharing Life in the Community. One of the legislators was quoted in the paper as saying, "We'll do anything, just call off the mothers."
Wow, I love that. That's a very interesting point of the history. And I also like very much to know how much it expanded, right, from the beginnings, from the origins of this project. And it's just great that you're actually been able to help so much people along the way. And one thing that really caught my attention when I was researching you was your mission statement. Because in that you say that NAMI Minnesota champions justice, dignity, and respect for all people affected by mental illnesses. And I think those three words are so different, honestly, and so like vivid. Justice, dignity, and respect. It says a lot. And how do you work to deliver that to people?
So I think there's three things. One is changing attitudes. So we know that, we have to change laws, of course, but we also need to change the attitudes. And we saw a lot of negative attitudes towards people with mental illnesses and their families. We used to blame mothers, right, for schizophrenia. We called them the schizophrenic mothers. We didn't recognize that mental illnesses actually begin in children, 50% by the age of 14. People were treated with fear. People, you didn't want someone with mental illness living in your apartment or working in your job or anything like that. And so people were very hesitant to even share that they lived with a mental illness because of the discrimination that they would face. And so we wanted to make sure, again, that people were treated with respect and with dignity. When we talk about other illnesses, cancer, MS, ALS, we talk about the courage that it takes to live with those illnesses. And when was the last time you heard the word courage used for someone who lives with bipolar disorder or schizophrenia? We do a little exercise in one of our public awareness trainings. We have people yell out all the slang words for mental illness. And there's a lot, right? Crazy is a part of our lexicon, nuts, all of those kinds of things. And then we ask them to yell out all of the slang words for heart disease or diabetes. And of course, there are none. And so it also kind of helps people realize that just even in how we talk about mental illnesses, we use slang words that are actually very disrespectful. And then the justice part for me really comes in with our public policy work, that we want to make sure that people are not facing discrimination in employment, in healthcare, in access to the mental health care treatment that they need. And so that really takes up a huge part of our work. So we work to raise that public awareness, and then we work to change the laws. Wow.
I love so many things that you said in this answer, and I'm going to address them one by one here. But first, I'm going to urge our listeners or viewers to go to your website, because we're going to try to cover some of your work or daily activities here, but it's definitely not going to be enough time. But their website is NAMI, N-A-M-I, and then M-N for Minnesota. So NAMIMN .org. You're going to find that link on our website, on the description of this episode as well. But then as I said, let's highlight things on your previous answer. I think the first thing really comes to my house, actually. I have an aunt that is schizophrenic. So when you're like going through this process of saying, oh, the schizophrenic moms and how it affect people and the different ways to call people that are living with this disease, it's really something that still happens. In my family, we don't have that, like, to face this challenge anymore, but it's still a stigma, right? And it's really, really important to educate people on that. And as I said, in your website, you have like so many resources, and it's really, really interesting to see. And beginning about education, since I said educate, you have a really deep work on education, right? That is not exactly to just raise awareness, but also towards the people that are facing challenges. Could you expand more on that, please?
So a big part of NAMI Minnesota, but across the country, is also educating family members. It's not like you take a health class in high school and they say, well, if you happen to, give birth to a son or daughter with schizophrenia, here's what you need to do. How do you deal with delusions or hallucinations, or maybe someone who's manic or who's suicidal? And so our classes really help family members know how to help their loved one. And many will say that it actually changed their life, that they were really able to see things from a different perspective, to truly help their loved one, not to argue and fight with them about treatment, but to really help them through this, because it's not easy. And our public awareness, the best way that we do that is called In Our Own Voice. And it's where people with mental illness actually share their story, because we know that's the best way to change public attitudes, because you see someone that looks like you sharing their story, and then you're like, oh, well, it can happen to anyone. We also do a lot of education in the community, especially around suicide. We want to make sure that just like people take first aid and CPR, that they take classes on suicide prevention, because we all have a role to play, frankly, in preventing suicides. And then we'll do kind of different presentations it might be to help mental health professionals learn more about maybe providing more culturally informed care, making sure different perspectives are shared, all of those kinds of things. But educating family members is huge, because they are, frankly, the safety net in our mental health system. And so we need to make sure that they know what the laws are, that they know good strategies to help, and frankly, how to make sure that you continue to be a parent or a spouse, right, or a child to someone who's living with a mental illness, that you don't totally change that relationship.
Yes, absolutely. And it's vital work, I believe, the one that you're providing to those families. And it's really something that, again, we don't talk enough, I believe. Still, it's part of the stigma of learning how to live with that. Another point that I found very interesting is this the amount of information and resources that you have in so many different areas. Again, you can find that easily on their website, but you have not only education and health and medical resources, but also legal resources, LGBTQ plus resources. Tell us about this work specifically, please.
So, especially if we take, for example, the LGBTQ community, we want to make sure that they know who are those therapists from those communities, so that they feel comfortable going to them. We also have a peer-led support group, and it's just for people from the LGBTQ community, so that they can find a safe space to actually, share living with a mental illness, and not feel like they're going to be, looked down on or discriminated against, because of that. We also have them for the Black, people of color, Indigenous communities as well. So that, again, it's kind of that safe space. And, it does make a big difference. I want to see a female physician. That's just my preference because I don't have to explain certain things. I know that she's going to get it. And the same is true for other communities. You know, if you're Black, you might want to see a Black therapist so you don't have to explain how racism is impacting your mental health. You might want to see a Spanish speaking therapist because Spanish is your first language and you don't want to have to do all that kind of translating. So making sure that you have the resources that truly meet your needs, we just think is critically important.
Well, and I couldn't agree more. And obviously, you also have like support groups, as you mentioned, to people who actually need to find this safe space, let's say, to share, to grow and keep their lives going. How do those supports group work?
So we actually put people through a training. So we have, it's called NAMI Connections for people who live with a mental illness who are leading those groups. And then we have support groups for family members, both for parents of children, because the issues are a little different, family members for adults. We actually have one for spouses or partners because that relationship is different, honestly, than if it's your adult child who is living with a mental illness. And we put them through a training so they kind of know how to lead a support group, how to handle what we call hot potatoes if someone's suicidal or something like that. And it's just, it's just helpful to go to a group and know that somebody gets it, right? And the other thing that it does is it actually provides hope. So when you're in the middle of, perhaps your symptoms or your family member's symptoms, you come to the group and you're just feeling pretty exhausted and beleaguered and all those kinds of things. And you see someone who had been in your situation, got better, and is actually giving back to the community, that actually provides hope for the future. And so we think that's just a really important part of our support groups.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I can see that happening. And in that point, I need to ask if anyone that is listening to us right now is in this position, needs help, either for them or for a loved one, what is the best way to reach out to get this help from you?
So calling or emailing us is best. If it's a full-blown crisis, call 988. If someone is actively suicidal, you're extremely worried about them being a danger to themselves or others, call 988. But otherwise, you can go to our website. You can call us at 651-645-2948. Or email us at namihelps@namimn.org. And I know we can post that information, but just feel free to reach out. We're not a crisis number, so we're open during regular business hours. I tend to answer emails, later at night for sure, but it is a good place to start. And we have a helpline, so we answer over 3,500 calls a year or emails from people saying, I don't know what to do. I'm in the hospital and they don't know why I'm here. Every imaginable question we've gotten.
Well, great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that information. We'll make sure to make it available for everyone listening to us right now. Another fourth thing that you mentioned, and I personally am very interested about to hear more, is the advocacy that you mentioned. I'm not an American citizen, so I get things from an international perspective. And I know that a lot of has been in discussion for your health system. But what about the mental health system in the country? What is the state of the art, let's say?
So our mental health system isn't broken. It was never built. So we went from state institutions, right, with most of them being closed down, which they should have been. They were not great places. None of us would have chosen to live there. But what we didn't do is actually build the community mental health system. And it wasn't built because of, frankly, discriminatory public policies. So we all know that private insurance doesn't fully cover mental health treatment and there's limited access to it, despite the fact that we have a mental health parity law that's been on the books, for decades. Medicaid, our public insurance, also discriminates against treatment for people with mental illnesses, as does Medicare. And so if you don't have money, you can't build a system. And so what we've really been doing the past couple of decades is figuring out what works and pushing for funding. And that's a huge part of NAMI's mission, both on the national and the state levels. So we go into every legislative session with quite a few bills to, again, build on what works and to address some of those newer issues. So workforce crisis is a huge one right now. And so, we'll be coming in with legislation. We have the last 2 years to really try to build our workforce and to have a workforce that's more culturally informed and culturally diverse. So again, we meet the needs of everyone. We look at housing. Housing is huge. If you are homeless, you cannot work on your recovery. And so how can we make sure that people have access to safe and affordable housing and get the supports they need, right, to live well in the community? We look at employment. A large percentage of people with mental illness are not employed, and they want to be. And so how do we make sure that people know about accommodations in the workplace, right? I mean, everyone knows if someone shows up in a wheelchair, you probably need a ramp, right? And you need, doors that can open from in that position. The desk might have to be higher for the wheelchair to get underneath. And then you say, well, someone's going to come work for you and they have schizophrenia, and people have no idea what those accommodations are. We work a lot on children's mental health. So what are we doing in our schools, right, to support resiliency, to support social emotional learning, to make sure that children have access to mental health treatment, and the barriers in terms of parents being able to take off of work and, driving distances and even costs, to make sure all of that is taken care of, because early intervention works. So it gets pretty broad. It's not like we can come in and just do one thing and that's going to build our mental health system. We have to look at it extremely broadly. And we always look at, you never know what train is leaving the station, so to speak, during a legislative session. So we just come in with a lot of different bills and ideas and work to get any or all of them passed.
Well, I'm really glad you brought all of this to us, because it expands so much our understanding of the issue. Because it's so easy to think of one person, one problem, and okay, let's deal with the illness, but we don't think of the network and the system that needs to come with to provide this person a better life. And in this point, what the American citizens can actually do, like to help you when this fight, it is a fight.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a big thing is to really learn about what's going on. So if you watch mainstream media, you might not know what bill is in play. And so most NAMIs across the country, we have a legislative update that we put out every Sunday, so people kind of know what are the issues, when do I need to call my legislator. The other thing is it's election season in a lot of places, right? So when that candidate comes knocking on your door, you share your story. And really, the most important thing is for people to share their stories. So when an elected official knows that their neighbor, their coworker has experienced, mental illness, the difficulties that they have faced, it makes just a huge impact. I mean, we've had legislators over the years that, they've been fine on our issues. When it impacted their family, they became advocates. So it really is an important part. One issue I forgot to mention is just the whole criminal justice issue. So often people with mental illnesses end up in the criminal justice system. And part of that is because we have not developed the same type of first responder system for mental health crises. Now in Minnesota, we do have mobile mental health crisis teams covering all 87 of our counties, but they're still not funded like we do for police and ambulances, and fire departments. And so we need to keep doing that. But we know if we can have a mental health response to a mental health crisis, that the person's not going to go to jail. And that's something that we want to continue to prevent from happening. The criminal justice system, is not the best place for someone with a mental illness. And police they can make a decision about whether to bring someone to the hospital or to the jail. I've sometimes, joked with sheriffs when they say we have so many people with mental illness in our jail. And I'm like, well, who brought them there? I mean, let's really look at that. Who brought them there? And then when jails say, well, we're the largest mental health facility, in our county, I want to say, and then tell me what mental health services you're providing. You might be the largest holding pen for people who live with a mental illness, but you're not necessarily the largest treatment facility.
Well, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Wow. I'm really glad that we had a chance to talk to you today. And now, so fortunately, my last question for you today is on every other instance, like how can people help you keep going? What are the best ways for people to get involved with this cause?
So I would say become a NAMI member. It's very cheap, $5. We thrive on, frankly, individual donations. Most NAMIs have a walk, and we have our walk, coming up in September. And those are also are good ways to become involved. Make sure that you're contacting your legislators. Volunteer. We need people to lead our support groups, to help with events and things like that. But I think the last thing I would say is to really be kind. Think about the words that you're using to talk about people. Think about how you can actually reach in to help someone who might be struggling with their mental health. Don't wait for them to reach out to you. Bring them a meal, see if they'll be interested in going for a walk. But the more that we really kind of accept people with mental illnesses into our lives and support them in a real, kind of real way, the better our communities will be.
Well, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sue. I love to talk to you. I learned so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks again for inviting me.
And for everybody listening, also thank you. And remember, if you enjoyed the episode, press subscribe on YouTube or in the podcast app, because that shows the algorithms that this is an important conversation, and then more people can learn about the importance of the National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI Minnesota. Bye, and see you at the next episode.